Okay, tell us who you are and where we are.
My name is Duncan Wiltshire. I'm the president of the Bentley Drivers Club. And we're here in this beautiful surroundings of Kelmarsh Hall in Northamptonshire for the club's annual concourse, basking in the sunshine.
And it is beautiful. Now, we're going to start on a controversial question. How do Rolls-Royce and Bentley differ? For people who don't necessarily know, some people just think of them as similar luxury cars, but they're actually quite different.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and you could easily understand why people who don't understand the difference between the two marques could easily think of them as being very similar luxury brands. And there's a lot of truth in that, but there's some really fundamental differences under the surface. And you've really got to go back to the dawn of the marques and to talk about Bentley in particular. Yes, Bentley was perceived as a luxury sports car after the First World War by W.O. Bentley. But of course what really put Bentley on the map was their competition successes, and in particular their famous victories at Le Mans.
Time period? What time period?
So Bentley were present at the very first Le Mans 24 Hours in 1923, which of course has just celebrated its centenary last month. And Bentley won the Le Mans 24 Hours for the first time in 1924. They won again in 27, 28, 29 and 30. So they came to dominate the sport. And this is really important because it's that domination that caught the attention of the British press. So Bentley became a household name, and its victories at Le Mans became a household name. And it's what elevated Bentley from just being another luxury brand in the 20s to being this mythical sporting brand that we know today. And I'd argue very strongly that's deeply embedded in the DNA of Bentley as a brand, and also Bentley Drivers Club as an organisation. So regardless of what model of Bentley you're driving, and you can look around the field here today, we've got everything represented here in this magnificent setting. But underlying it all is this DNA of competitive spirit. So that's a fundamental difference between the Bentley and the Rolls-Royce. And then that's then manifested in the ownership, because your typical Bentley owner is someone who's driving the car is a really, really important part of the experience. So whilst we're sitting here in a great field, we've all driven a long way to be here. We've had a great tour yesterday around the Northamptonshire countryside. And for me, someone who I've raced my 1928 3-litre Bentley for just over 30 years now. I'd like to think I'm still young, but perhaps I'm not as young as I used to be. But I have raced a 3-litre for over 30 years now. And the club has our annual Silverstone race meeting coming up on the 12th of August this year. And
now, when you say racing, people will think these cars could be worth £1 million. Are people racing?
It's a very good question. If you were sitting in the passenger seat, you would be under no illusions whatsoever. It's proper racing. It is proper racing. There's no two ways about it. Very competitive.
Some show parade.
It is absolutely not.
Friends off the field.
My 3-litre is. It's not the fastest car on track because of its age, and it's one of the early cars. So I'm not fighting for a podium position. I might be fighting for 23rd place, but I'm still having a fight because
whoever's
in my personal position, a great mate of mine, Jock McKinnon, we've raced against each other for 30 years.
Yes.
We could be a few hundredths of a second apart around the racetrack, and we can be a few millimetres apart on the racetrack as well, and knowing in full confidence that we know what we're doing, and it is fabulously good fun. But the great thing about the racing is it's actually remarkably sociable. The club's meeting at Silverstone is arguably the club's biggest turnout of members. So we get every shade of member turning up to watch.
So that really
and to
underlines
socialise.
the owners are drivers and racing is in their blood.
Oh, absolutely. It is absolutely in the DNA of the club. The Bentley Drivers Club was founded in 1936. And there was a chap called Keston Pelmore, had a 4.5 Bentley. And he conceived this idea of a club to bring like-minded people together. So he went to Brooklands, to the racetrack at Brooklands, which was the home of motor racing in the UK before the war. and he had a little card made, and he put it under the windscreen of every Bentley that he could find in the paddock and in the car park, to say, we're thinking of forming this club. If you want to come to this to a hotel on this particular date, and a surprisingly large number of people turned up to this gathering, and that was the birth of the Bentley Drivers Club. So it absolutely was born in the race paddock at Brooklands. So whilst we can all accept that not every member of the club races, and the vast majority, of course, don't. But racing has always been at the absolute core of the club. So the club's race meeting is a vital part of the mixture. And we've got all ages turning up.
I was going to ask, say if I wanted to get into racing at Bentley, I mean, I have an Arnage, I'm not going to race that necessarily, or do people race that?
The problem with an Arnage or my Turbo R that I'm sitting on, it's a big heavy lump, and you've got to do quite a bit of work to get it raceable. Because
Phantom do have a racing version of
absolutely
your
right,
car, which is quite fun.
They've spent a lot of time developing their racing Turbo R, and it is spectacular. But they'll tell you, you've got to sort out the brakes because it's a heavy car, and a racetrack is a very different environment.
And I think they've gone through a number of engines.
You can race anything if you set your mind to it. So we're seeing Continental GTs racing now.
So if I wanted a Continental GT, I could race that.
You could.
What would I have to do?
You would need to upgrade the brakes fundamentally.
Okay.
You wouldn't need to do much more. You'd want to get rid of some of the weight. You've got to be a bit careful not to upset the weight balance. You'd need to put in a roll cage for the racing regulations, for sure, and a fire extinguisher and one or two other things. Yeah. But I can tell you, the Bentley Drivers Club, our competitions committee, we're looking at establishing a series specifically for Continental GTs. Because you can buy a Continental GT from, for example, from the internet, for remarkably little money. And if you're going to race it, it doesn't necessarily have to be road legal. So you could actually find an insurance write-off if you really wanted to, if you didn't want to drive it on the road. That actually got nothing wrong with it, other than it might have some bodywork damage, which is easily fixed. But the idea is we're working on a set of very simple rules of do's and don'ts. So things you can modify and things you can't. And so specifying a brake system that we know would then withstand the duration of a race without running out of pads or boiling, which the standard road brakes would do. A standard roll cage, trying to make sure that the cars are all of a similar specification when they're finished, but not too expensive, so that you don't have to spend too much money on the modifications. And we're
getting great. How many laps would there be?
Well, that would probably be maybe a 15 or 20 minute race. So depending on the circuit, you'd be doing a dozen, 15 laps maybe. So it's a good long race. We'd look to have a series that ran maybe half a dozen times a year. Bentley Motors are being very supportive of this program, and M Sport that were running the Works GT3 race program recently. They've been extremely helpful as well, along with one or two others.
Could you turn up in a GT3 or a Super Sport? No.
No.
This is for Continental.
No, because you'd blow the opposition out into the weeds. So this is aimed at, the other point is to keep the cost down. So this is aimed at the early first spec.
Up a Continental GT for say 15,000. How much more would I roughly?
You're probably going to be spending. You're probably going to be spending another 30 or 40 on it.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's.
But to put it in context, if you were going to get an MGB to go racing, FIA spec MGB, that's going to cost you 50,000 today. Okay. So we're at that level of expenditure. So this is still cheap racing. You can go cheap. You can go racing for cheaper, but if you're going to race a Bentley, you've got to do it properly. Yeah. But it is still pretty. By racing standards, that's pretty affordable stuff. Yes. Yeah. And we've got a lot of interest. So we're probably a couple of years away from it actually hitting the racetracks, but we're working furiously on it in the background.
Good stuff.
That's very exciting. Very exciting.
That would be great fun. And has anyone, speaking of racing, has anyone put a manual gearbox into a GT?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, they've got paddle shift. The one thing I would say about taking a Continental GT and turning it into something raceable, the engine and the gearbox are so damn good. Don't touch them. And if you start touching them, you're just going to get into big money. So don't touch them. They are brilliant. So all you've got to do is get the weight down, get the braking system working, get compliance with the regulations of roll cage, fire extinguisher, and such like. It's depressing that how the numbers do mount up. You can't avoid it. So we're working to keep the cost down as much as possible.
But it could actually be a road car and a racing car.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason you couldn't keep it road registered. Absolutely.
See, that's quite cool. That would be very cool.
It's very cool.
Okay.
I can see you're tempted.
Yes. I'm very tempted.